We've been waiting for you, Diana. We've been waiting for you.
Helen. Where's Charles? There's something wrong, isn't there? Where's Alan?
Nothing's wrong. Come, sister.
Where's Charles?
You don't need Charles.
Hello, welcome back to episode 3 of our Curate series looking at women. I'm Callum, I'm back here again with Catherine and Caitlin. Today we're discussing Dracula, Prince of Darkness, which is a 1966 film by Terence Fisher. So a lot of what we discuss is very, as with all these films, very to do with the context of films. And maybe to start, if you just give us a little bit of the context of what's happening in the time this was released.
Totally. So it was released in 1966, but throughout the 1960s we see really big changes happening for women socially. So in 1961, the contraceptive pill is introduced. For the first time, a woman's got sexual freedom. She can have sex without having to become a mother or risking that. And the women's liberation movement is starting to get into full swing, particularly by the middle to late 60s into the 70s. So, it's in the air, people are talking about it. And of course, it means that the younger generation who are growing up with this have got a different sense of womanhood and femininity. And it tends to be associated more with kind of sex, drugs, rock and roll, free love. That's the generation that's kind of growing up in this. And it's really interesting to see the two characters that represent this change. In Dracula, Prince of Darkness, Helen, the very pious old guard, practically Victorian in her approach to her sexuality and femininity, versus Diana, her sister-in-law, who is very soft, playful, a kind of femme enfant figure.
And so is this film approaching, does come across not very intentional, but sort of it has a representation of this sort of the young shifting into the new way of thinking. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, totally. So I suppose it's hard for the context of a film not to drift on screen. It makes it exciting for an audience to go and see more than anything. We love seeing ourselves on screen. And what's interesting is that, these two figures aren't necessarily new at this point, the flirtatious young woman versus the kind of matronly religious older woman, but they do very interestingly reflect these sorts of social movements at this time. And I think what's interesting is to look at Helen's character within this. She is first introduced to us in the tavern scene where her hair is pinned back incredibly tightly and in place. I think a tornado could hit her and she wouldn't put hair out of place. And she's wearing a very dour, proper two-piece green costume. But she's seen with this younger, more flirtatious sister-in-law, Diana, who's got incredibly soft features in comparison. And she's got very soft blonde hair. She's got a more petite frame. Everything about her is more vivacious.
Okay. Just upon watching the film, how do you find the way you respond, both of you, to the characters, the female characters, in the sort of opening part? Do you feel more drawn towards one than the other, or what are your feelings towards them?
How did you feel?
What do you mean draw, as in relate to one more than the other? I don't know, because I think we're different again as women now to how they're presented. I don't think, obviously now women are a lot more sexually liberated than probably they even were then. So in some ways, Diana, but I'd probably say less relatable to Helen because of how you've described her. But yeah, I think because of the context of the film, again, it's like different for us as women. So I don't know.
There was also something really attractive about Helen, you know, she's mysterious, she seems a bit more androgynous in the sense that even though she's playing this hyper female character, you know, the matron at the beginning, and then an incredibly sensual vampire throughout the rest of the film, she does walk that line between, as Barbara Creed states in The Monstrous Feminine, you know, which is like, I suppose, a key text in feminist film theory when you're looking at horror. She is a seducer par excellence. She is at once the tempting and desired femme fatale that Marianne Doane talks about and that we spoke about with regards to Gilda. But she's also a vampire, a Dracula. You know, she's got this. She's got the Count's grace, and she has the potential to sexually awaken other people. And in that sense, I thought she was a really fascinating character. You know, I did exactly as the film wanted me to do. I wanted to demystify her. I knew she was too straight-laced to continue like that.
Yeah. So I wonder, with the two characters, how pre-vampirification, how kind of liberated do you feel they are as characters?
What's your thoughts?
We've discussed this, I think, a bit. Not very at all. It still feels like a film where the men are the ones who make the rules and tell you what to do, and they're the ones in charge. So I think the women are still very much oppressed in it.
Isn't it awful when you see them all going into the carriage and Helen goes, I've just got a bad feeling about this. We shouldn't be taking this mysteriously, miraculously arriving carriage drawn by a horse to a place that everyone's told us we shouldn't go to. But the men, with their kind of sense of adventure, want to go. And so they get to play out their kind of chivalrous saviour roles, particularly Diana's partner, because they put themselves in this very vulnerable position.
And so how do you think the whole idea of, you kind of were touching on it already, but the idea of being bitten, penetrated by a vampire, and Helen becoming a vampire herself, how do you think that is liberating, or rather kind of messes around with gender roles?
Well, kind of interestingly, looking at the context when, you know, a big part of the women's lib movement was being a feminist and being a lesbian and being a lesbian feminist, and actually breaking down gender divides and kind of normative family constructs. You know, Barbara Creed calls the vampire or the monster in conflict with the family. And what happens with the female vampire or the female Dracula is that she has the fangs, she has the kind of the phallic object per se, that will then penetrate the virgin skin. So, you know, she kind of debunks that Freudian myth that a woman's got penis envy. You know, she doesn't need a man to be complete or to rejuvenate or to be immortal. She has everything in herself, and therefore the traditional role of man is challenged. She can take on his penetrative role.
And you describe it as lesbian vampire. Can you explain a bit about what makes it lesbian vampire?
Totally. So, well, one, there are lots of lesbian vampire films, so it's a bit of a trope of the genre. But of course, Barbara Creed then talks about the lesbian vampire, and it's interesting to see that actually it does arrive in Helen, because she tries to tempt Diana in that scene when she walks down the staircase, kind of ephemeral, almost like a spectre, or, you know, almost an angel, in fact, come to take Diana, although we know that she's got a very different intention. And in that sense, you know, Diana can move from the hands of her husband Charles into the hands of another powerful, you know, kind of masculine type figure of Helen, the vampire.
How did you, Caitlin, think about the whole, just from your perspective, watching it, how did you feel about Helen becoming a vampire and how that changed her role on screen and the sort of contrast between her and Diana?
Something I was just going to say is, like, I suppose Helen is the lesbian vampire thing. She is the one who's trying to tempt Diana in, but all of this has come from Dracula, who is a man, and he's still very much sort of like in control of Helen. Every time she goes to get Diana, Dracula swoops in and takes her away. So she's still very much like under a male thumb.
My feeling, I remember sort of, I think I do agree with this, but I remember thinking this film is made by a man, right? And the protagonists are men.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something about how it almost feels a bit, and I know you touched on this, but it feels a bit like male anxiety is about losing their woman in a way that's going on. It's a bit like she's almost been corrupted by another man. The men are afraid of that, and her becoming empowered by being, if you see the sort of becoming a vampire as being like sexually liberated in the sense that because they're much more kind of, they act more freely and they have fangs now, they have a lot more power. I think that threatens the men. They also feel like there's this dark kind of corruption that almost makes me think of something like the classic male anxiety about having your woman taken by another man. I think there's a lot of that male anxiety really like dripping off the screen.
Totally, and I mean, firstly, kind of in relation to your point, she's always under Dracula's spell or trance, like she's not got a clear head. Everything that makes her masculinized or powerful is just to serve Dracula. And secondly, it's interesting to see that, Helen is married, and her kind of sexual awakening by Dracula out of marriage makes her into this monstrous, corrupt woman. So by breaking the rules of the normative family, of marriage, by crossing that line, she is then, shown as the kind of evil villain, who then is, of course, in the quite striking scene in Dracula Prince of Darkness, strapped down by the monks and has a stake driven through her chest, ultimate patriarchal masculine power in the form of a stake, to end it. I mean, the kind of interesting point to pick up on would then be kind of, if we take Creed's reading of the horror film and the female Dracula, where do we get to? And she uses Christeva, the French feminist theorist, as or Christeva's writing, as the basis for her book, The Monstrous Feminine. And she talks about objection and the abject. And what we see when, gender roles are shifted, the woman suddenly becomes the more powerful figure, or she can usurp a man's traditional role of having to catch a woman. She becomes another form of abjection because, as Christeva states, we may call it a border. Objection is above all ambiguity, because, while releasing a hold, it does not radically cut off the subject from what threatens it. On the contrary, abjection acknowledges it to be in perpetual danger. So in terms of her transformation, I mean, really physically, it's interesting to look at how she changes. There's that beautiful kind of bizarre bedroom scene where you see Diana in a very light chiffon nightdress with her décollage and her back on show. She's quite sexual, she's flirtatious, and we see, in parallel cut, Helen putting an incredibly tight cape over her chest to kind of hide any sexual kind of form that she might take onto her husband, and so when she then transforms into the Dracula, this odd thing happens because she becomes not a matronly image of the feminine, but an incredibly sexualized image of the feminine. She has the rolled hair, as we spoke about with Gilda, that kind of loose, wild, free hair. She wears red lipstick, very seductive, and more and more of her body comes on show. We get her décollage, and her arms are on show as well. And so, whilst she is masculinized by being able to take the form of the male as predator, and stopping being the female as prey, she also becomes hyperfeminized. So you get this really interesting image of the hyperfeminine being like a total masculine construct to, I think exactly as you said, to offset any male fears about their own masculinity. If a woman is that threatening that she could seduce your rationality away from you, she can take the blame, exactly as we were saying with Gilda, you know, for a sense of emasculation in man.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting how the sort of way that she's transformed, the very way she is afterwards, there's something very... It's interesting because what, again, you were saying is that she's still she's almost enslaved by Dracula. I think it's quite interesting how she can't escape the sort of male power in a way. But there's something I think that potentially the filmmakers were trying to make scary at the time, the whole she's no longer of our sort of she doesn't buy into our structures anymore, she's something else, and that scares us. And in some ways I wonder if the film is meant to be not like kind of like a cautionary tale almost, trying to be like, women, don't be getting bitten.
Well, as we were talking about Diana, you know, she adheres to masculine forms of power, and she falls into the arms of, I think, every man that she's on screen with, pretty much, thus reasserting the norm, the traditional husband as kind of saviour of the family in some respects, and you know, the woman is subservient to his needs and desires, and what we then see with Helen, which is quite exciting, exactly as you said, in terms of social history, is that she moves from the hands of man, you know, she's subjected to her husband and she's terrified of her own sexuality, to then moving to the hands of God, you know, another patriarchal institution, religion, the church. And I think you see that at the beginning. She's very pious and afraid of her sexuality because of this, because of the institution of Christianity that she's brought into, which, you know, you see a lot of in Carrie as well, with the mother in particular. And then at the end, when the monks drive a stake through her heart, she again is returned to God, another patriarchal, what would we call it, a kind of patriarchal father figure.
Do you think in any way, I think this might be a little bit far-fetched to be honest, considering the time, but the women are in some way presented as like the sensible voice, who like know what is right and wrong, but they're just not listened to. Do you think in any way there's any intention in that by the like writers or directors? I feel like probably not, but they are the ones who are like, we shouldn't do this, and the men are like, no, we're gonna go on our adventure and do this. And at the end, I think it's Diana's like, you can't go back there, you can't go back to the castle, what are you doing? And the men are like, no, we must kill Dracula. The women seem to be presented in some ways as like the people who do sort of know what is the sensible and right thing to do. I don't know what you think about that.
Oh, I think that's fascinating. What were you going to...
Well, I wonder if in some ways we maybe... I thought about this at the time as well, and to what extent the filmmakers are actually sort of... Because they seem so sensible, you know, but I wonder if we're almost projecting ourselves like that is sensible, but the filmmakers are like good old men being all like, they're just foolhardy, but they're great. I don't know, I wonder if the women are sort of being presented, because you could also see it maybe as like women are scared and emotional is what they're trying to convey with some of it as well. But
it's like the double nature of women that's so complex but so interesting in this film that was brought about. You know, they're at once the motherly figures warning us from danger, but they're also the hysterical figures who are too intuitive. You know, they're just following their emotions and they aren't taking rational precautions, because of course we all know as viewers that Dracula isn't real and that a small bat can't turn into a man. So yes, it's exactly that. It's playing off of both their sensibility and their sensibleness.
Yes, very good. Yeah, cool. I think it will be.
Yeah, interesting.
It's interesting though. Yeah, interesting. Good choice. It's a weird film though. Thank you for joining. We'll be talking next time about Gone Girl. For all the articles and all that stuff, go to neoneye.co.uk. You can see Catherine's Looking at Women series. There's a article with every film that we'll be talking about, as well as some supplementary stuff for you to get your teeth into. No Dracula pun intended. Thank you. Until next time.